Are recording now, okay. Well, welcome to this AutoCAD and Design Automation for AutoCAD API update session. I'm Stephen Preston. I work for the Autodesk Developer Network team here in San Rafael, California. We also have my co-presenter, Scott Kreider, who is a product manager for AutoCAD, who's in our San Francisco office at the moment. Hi, Scott.
Hi.
And I'm going to be talking about the basic AutoCAD API issues, and Scott is going to then talk about some new technologies, particularly design automation for AutoCAD, and another technology which we're quite excited about called AutoCAD Fabric, so we'll talk about that later. This version of AutoCAD, internally we codenamed it AutoCAD Pi because we're kind of moving up the alphabet. The previous one was O, the next one is Q, but you will know this when it's released, obviously, as AutoCAD 2019. Now, this particular presentation is open to everybody. So this is a presentation we normally give just to ADN members, but we've opened it up this year to non-ADN members as well. And I'm sure there's a lot of you in the audience. But one issue with that is there is some information which is confidential, which we're not able to tell you in this particular presentation. But for ADN members, we did hold back in December a Meet the Expert webinar where Heidi Hewitt talked through all of the new product features for AutoCAD. So this particular presentation in terms of AutoCAD is purely APIs. So if you're interested in the new product features before release, if you're an ADN partner, you can go to the ADN extranet, which is a members only extranet, adn.autodesk.io, and go to the software section, and there you will find the webinar recordings. Alternatively, if you're not an ADN partner but you are a member of the AutoCAD beta project on beta.autodesk.com, you can go there as well and find the preview guide. Now, in terms of APIs, it's a fairly quick story to tell. We don't have any major new API features. By which I mean there's not this big set of APIs grouped around a particular piece of functionality. However, there are lots of small changes, but they're kind of small changes to functions, maybe the odd additional function, the odd function change in behavior. And they're kind of dotted around a bit in the API, and it's all single function, so it's hard to cover them in a webinar. So for that information, you should go to the Object ARX SDK and look at the What's New section in the ARX MGD and ARX Ref CHM files. But it's really small changes. So this presentation, from my perspective, is going to focus all on migration. So this is what you need to do to have your applications ready for the next release of AutoCAD, for AutoCAD Pi, for AutoCAD 2019. And hopefully, if you're an App Store publisher, to have that live in the store on launch day, so that all your customers who've just updated to the new version of AutoCAD can also update their add-ins to your add-in as well. This is a PowerPoint slide that we show every year, which is why it looks very dated now, because we like to keep it the same and just update it. So this is basically showing the compatibility cycle for AutoCAD. And basically the top line is the DWG format compatibility. Then we have the compiler compatibility and the API compatibility, and then we have the compiler compatibility. And so we're here on AutoCAD 2019, AutoCAD Pi. Anything beyond this green star here really is our best guess of what's coming in the future. Obviously, we can't completely predict the future, but our expectation at this moment in time is that obviously AutoCAD 2019 is maintaining DWG compatibility with a previous release. At the moment, we're not expecting the DWG format to change next year either. Similarly, we have broken Object ARX compatibility. this year. So that means that there is a little bit of migration required for your Object-ARX applications between last year and this year. But we at the moment, we're not planning to break that next year. But who knows? Sometimes that's dependent on what Microsoft does with its compilers. And similarly, we're expecting that we will be using the same compiler next year. But again, that's partly dependent on Microsoft. And I should add as well that this whole binary breaking thing, it affects registry entries, and it affects C++ unmanaged Object-ARX applications. For the most part, using .NET or using Lisp immunizes you from a lot of these changes, and I'll cover that in a moment. But for now, we'll just talk about the general issues related to migration. So as I said, this is a binary breaking release, which means that the major version number where it's used in places like the registry has changed. So where we have R, I think previous version was R23. Basically, if we're not making a binary compatibility change, we update the minor version number. When we update the major version number. So this coming release is R23. So if you're accessing a registry, or if you're using the autoloader and you're specifying versions in the package contents XML, you need to update that. Visual Studio versions, we're on Visual Studio 2017. Microsoft keep releasing updates for Visual Studio, and they've made it really hard for you to not accept those updates these days. So using any version of Visual Studio 15 dot whatever should be absolutely fine. .NET Framework is version 4.7, and the platform toolset version, which again is related to C++, is version 1.4.1, which that's very heavily tied into the Visual Studio version. And as I said, for the DWG and DXF format, there's no change. So specifically for Object-ARX now, you do have to use Visual Studio 2017. You do need to make sure you're using the most up-to-date platform toolset, which is v1.4.1. And when you're compiling, you need to link to the star 23.libs rather than last year's star 22.libs. And any additional references to things like type libraries, interface versions, specific DLL versions, you all have to there as well update from 22 to 23. And I know that a lot of you like to use the same machine for compiling applications for multiple versions of AutoCAD. So you can use Visual Studio 2017 to compile applications for previous versions of AutoCAD, but only if you also have the older versions of Visual Studio installed, because that's the only way that you can install these the platform tool sets to target the correct version of AutoCAD. So if you're compiling for AutoCAD 2016, you would install Visual Studio 2012 and you would select platform toolset 1.1.0. If for 2017 or 2018, you would again, you'd install Visual Studio 2015 and select platform toolset 1.4.0. And for AutoCAD 2019, this next release, you just need Visual Studio 2017 and select toolkit 1.4.1. That may be a little bit complicated. So Madhukar from our team has created a little video, which I won't show now, but there are links in the PowerPoint, and we'll make sure that when we post a recording for this, that we include those links. It's basically a short video that just explains how to set up Visual Studio for your basic Object-ARX development, the basic settings you need. For the AutoCAD Object-ARX add-ins, you don't have to, you may have some additional settings for your own applications, of course, that you have to take care of yourself. I wanted to mention a couple of extra things for Object-ARX. So this is so far I'm talking about Object-ARX C++ unmanaged code, the raw API, if you like, right down there on the metal. We talked about this for a few years now. We're asking all Object-ARX developers to start using these compiler security settings flags to minimize the risk that your add-ins are going to be hacked by somebody malicious. So we have some security compiler settings that you really should be using now. You can look these up on MSDN. And also, if you're coming from a very old version of AutoCAD, you may have dependencies on some very old Visual Studio runtimes, and you need to start removing these from your code now, because Microsoft is going to be killing support for those very old versions. Things like very old versions of ATL and MFC. And then we come to migration steps for .NET and Lisp. And as I mentioned before, basically nothing is required. However, although we do our best to make sure that an old, say a version of a .NET application compiled for AutoCAD 2018, we do our best to make sure that just works without having to be recompiled for 2019. You still need to check, because sometimes people make mistakes. So you absolutely should be testing your applications on the new release, even if you're using .NET and Lisp, and you need to report those issues to us as quickly as possible before AutoCAD is released. Not that we're expecting any issues. And of course, just reiterating, with .NET and Lisp, if you're using, if you have an app that you're publishing in the App Store and you're using, for example, the Autoloader package, you need to update that major version number from R22 to R23, so that the Autoloader will load your code in the new version of AutoCAD. Another blast from the past, we've been saying this for a few years now: trusted paths and Autoloader. So, Autoloader is now our preferred way of deploying applications. I understand that, we know that some applications are more complicated, and it's not really possible for you to use Autoloader. But if you can, it is the most simple deployment setup for you. Your installer just has to copy a bundle of files to a single folder, and AutoCAD auto detects them and loads them. So there's no complicated installer MSI scripts that you have to work with. It's the simplest possible installer. But AutoCAD does warn customers if it is trying to load a DLL which is not trusted. And trusted means one of two things. It means either the DLL has been installed into the program files folder. The justification for that being that if anybody has managed to install something into program files, it means that you gave a top level of trust to the installer that did that, which means that you have said that, hey, I trust this thing, AutoCAD, you don't need to worry about it. Alternatively, you can also install Autoloader applications into the program data and the app data locations. If you install them there, those are locations that users without admin privileges can access. So if you install your files there and you have not digitally signed your application, AutoCAD will show a little dialogue, a little bit like the one there on the bottom right, warning the customer and scaring them a little bit that your code is not trusted and is not signed. The way to get around that is simple. You either install the program files or you sign your DLLs. And again, there's a link here which we'll make sure that link is included when we send out a link to the recording for this presentation. We do encourage you to digitally sign your files. There is a small cost. It costs around, I think the minimum is about $100 now to buy a digital signature. But once you have a digital certificate, you can use it to sign all of your applications. You don't need to have one certificate per application. And it gives the customer some level of trust of the integrity of your add-in and the identity of your author. Basically, to get a digital certificate, you need to go through a small identity verification process with the certificate issuer. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of our major accounts now will not allow unsigned files to be installed on their network. So we are finding that some application vendors people aren't even considering their applications because they are not digitally signed, they'll download them for a trial, maybe from the App Store, see they're not digitally signed, and just walk away. So we have this signtool.exe that you can use to digitally sign .NET and native C++ add-ins. And we also have a in the AutoCAD installation folder, we have a digital signing tool for Lisp as well. So you need to buy your own digital certificate and use one of those tools to sign your DLLs. So that is a very short presentation because really the migration steps are pretty easy this year. Although we have broken binary compatibility, I think I would say the AutoCAD team are getting pretty good at minimizing the impact to third-party developers now. They're getting pretty good at this now. So we're just going to stop just for a moment. If anyone has any questions specifically on the migration, please ask them now through the console, and then we'll move on to Scott's presentation. And I would encourage you, even if your primary interest is AutoCAD desktop, don't leave yet, because particularly the AutoCAD Fabric thing at the end, I think you're going to find is quite interesting. So Viru, do we have any questions coming through? If not,
we have a few questions, but I think we have answered it in the console itself.
Okay.
So nothing much in terms of API breaking or migration.
Okay, well, we'll give 10 more seconds for people to keep typing, and then we'll move over to Scott. Actually, I'll start passing over to Scott now, so he can start preparing. Okay, so Scott, making you presenter, so you should be able to share your screen now. And any final questions before we move on to Scott? Nope. Okay, off you go then, Scott.
Great. Are you able to see the slides, Stephen?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone online for joining us. As Stephen mentioned, in this section of the webinar, we're going to be talking a little bit about the new version of our Forge Design Automation API, so that those of you who already are leveraging our cloud services can make the most of the tools. And for those of you who are not yet building on Forge, this will give you a chance to see what all the hype's about, so you can make a more informed decision as to whether or not this is something you want to look into. After that, we'll go deeper into AutoCAD land and talk about some of the really exciting work that's being done by the AutoCAD team on a project called AutoCAD Fabric, which Stephen mentioned earlier. So first though, let's dive into Forge Design Automation. So Autodesk offers a variety of Forge services which enable you to leverage design and engineering data to develop custom software applications on the cloud. And these APIs range from data management, model viewing, there is the recently added reality capture API, and the design automation API, which we're here to talk about today. The design automation API helps you leverage the scale of Autodesk's cloud to run automation scripts on your design files. It's an incredibly simple and yet very powerful concept. And essentially what this means is that Forge Design Automation enables you to automate the creation, modification, and data extraction activities that you would normally do on your desktop in AutoCAD via the command line or via your add-ins. So again, this sounds simple, and it is, but it can also be a very powerful tool in your workflow, as you can use design automation to batch process drawings and produce automated reports. You can apply company standards or create documentation, all via a cloud service. Every day, design automation handles about 60,000 drawings, DWGs. I think this was launched in 2014, and it's pretty robust at this point. And since it's a cloud service, there's no hardware required and no licensing. You can get started for free and then scale up as you need. So let's take a look a little bit more in depth at how design automation works. Here's my PowerPoint flow of how design automation works. And the process here is broken down into 4 steps, but really step 1 only occurs once. That's when you make your data inputs available in the cloud. Then steps 2, 3, and 4 are repeated for each of your work items. So first, since it's a cloud service, you need to make your data inputs or drawings available to the cloud. Since design automation will have to interact with those drawings, it will need the ability to access your storage location, whether it's A360, Dropbox, or your own cloud storage. So you'll need to do some permissioning there to let Forge access wherever you have your drawings stored. But once you have your drawings made available in the cloud, you can then provide design automation with the URLs to your input files. And this enables design automation to go and use a Git to download that data and grab the data it needs for processing. In the third step, the work items are loaded into the engine itself. They're processed. And this engine could be something such as AutoCAD. It's a product that you're used to interacting with in a desktop environment, just made available in the cloud so that you can automatically run these processes. So this could mean that the file's modified, or maybe you're just pulling data out that you need to use in another process. And then lastly, the output file is sent back to a URL location that you specified. So there's no storage included in Design Automation API. It's a very simple input, run a process, output system. So you need to specify the input URL where you want Design Automation to go grab a file, and then also code in what you want it to do in the engine, and then specify an output location for it to place the output when it's done. So when we talk about this system, we'll often use, you've heard me use engine, work items, activities, and apps, and those will hopefully make a little more sense in the next slide. But engines are essentially the Autodesk application that you're using. So in this sense, we're sending something up to the cloud to be worked on by AutoCAD. That would be our engine. Work items and activities are the function calls that are loaded into Design Automation. So work items are what you submit into the engine, and an activity is the sequence of commands that you execute. You create that activity once, and then you can use it as many times as you want. Apps are the plugins or content, such as block libraries that you'd want to use with your activities. So this is Design Automation as it has existed today. Design Automation, which is our second version. The new version of the Design Automation API, our third version, has several new improvements, and we can talk about those, as well as there are some reworked endpoints, although those will look very similar to what we had in V2. So V3 features simplified JSON payloads that make it just a little bit easier for you to code up your solutions. We've introduced the idea of aliasing and sharing your solutions, as well as progress reporting and canceling. In the table at the bottom, you can see the HTTP endpoints that we just talked about on the previous slide, as well as their updated endpoints for V3. So while the API did change, it's very familiar, right? Mostly these are just changes to the case of the items for consistency with our other solutions. And you can see here we have the programming concept and the product concept for each of these. So work items are essentially function calls that are submitted to the system. An activity would be, what is that function definition? What are we going to be doing to the file? App packages are your shared libraries or plugins, and then engines would be the actual product, the instruction set. So let's go into each of these improvements for V3 of Design Automation in a little bit more detail. Simplified payloads. Here you can see the JSON payloads for a plot to PDF activity. First in V2, hidden in the back, and then a simplified version in V3. You can see that the user has specified an activity for the engine to run, right? In this case, that activity is called plot to PDF, and we have an input argument, which has a resource URL, and an output URL. In V3, we've simplified it a little bit. The arguments, where before you had to specify the input argument and the output argument, we now infer them based on the verb. So in the top of V3, you can see that the user hasn't supplied a verb, so we infer that this is a get command, since it's one of the input arguments. So Design Automation will go to that specified URL and get the work items needed. Then the result argument has the verb put, so below that is the output URL. This is small, but you can see if you're making lots of these, this does create a simplified payload and hopefully will make your lives a little bit easier. So we're talking about AutoCAD as our engine, right? And plot to PDF as our activity. In V3, we also give you more control over how you update your activities and apps. So we now provide you with the ability to reference aliases rather than discrete activity names, such as AutoCAD plus plot to PDF. So let's say, for instance, you've created this plot to PDF activity and you've uploaded it to the service, and people have started uploading work items to be processed by this plot to PDF activity. With V2, if you have an explicit version referenced, then every time you update your code, you would have needed to notify your users of the new version, which is not very convenient. In V3, you can now use an alias so that instead of referencing a specific version of plot to PDF, you can have the user just reference a name in their work item, such as plus prod. You can then have your users keep using the prod version while you work on your next version of the application. When you're ready, you can change that version, that new version that you've been working on, to prod, and your users will automatically start using that latest version. So this really fancy animation here shows what that would look like. You've got 3 versions of your plot to PDF, and when you're ready, you update what the prod alias points to and what the beta alias points to, so that version 2 becomes prod and version 3 becomes beta that you're working on. So you can roll forward and roll backward as needed, and your users won't know anything different and won't need to do any more work, more importantly. So as part of this, we're also enabling you to explicitly share your activities and applications with other people who use design automation. In V2, we added the ability to make an activity public or share it with everyone. But in V3, we expanded on that a little bit, and now you can share your activity with everyone or just with one person. So we will keep expanding this. If it's important for you to have a select list of users that you'd like to share it with rather than just one person, reach out. It's in our roadmap, but we're always interested in hearing what's important to you guys. So right now you can share with either the world or with one person. And here at the bottom, you can see examples of entering a Forge client ID to share your activity with them, and that's how you would go about that. So V3 also now has built-in support for canceling. This is useful if you get a process that's running for a really long time and you need to back out of it. So you can now cancel a work item if it's taking too long to process, rather than just keep your apps chugging away on something. And you can either do this on demand by passing a delete request with the work item ID, or you can do it based on some predefined arguments. So here there's the 2 new arguments that you can use if you want to predefine some logic to cancel a work item, on progress and on complete. So I don't know how many people on this call were at the Forge DevCon this last November in Las Vegas, but they talked about webhooks on Forge. And this is a very similar concept to that, where your plot to PDF activity, you can write in there an extra argument called on progress. And then as you start plotting, we can call an URL every minute or every 30 seconds. And if you return a 205, then we will cancel that request. And this is much better than polling because it uses callbacks, and you don't need to be constantly using a thread to check, has my work item finished? Has my work item finished? So this is hopefully a more intelligent way to manage the operations of your work items. And lastly, some exciting news. So far today, we've focused entirely on AutoCAD, right? We've talked about work items, activities, engine, and the engine has always been AutoCAD. And that's because these are the components you interact with the most. But the exciting news on the engine front is that this spring, that's all going to change, as Revit, Inventor, and 3ds Max are all going to be added as engines for you to use. So if you want more information on these new engines, reach out to Steven or me, and we can get you connected with the right Autodesk person to help you out. But the good news is those of you who have started using AutoCAD a lot, it's going to be the same framework, right? So working with work items, the things that you've learned already will continue to be useful. It's just now it'll be more powerful as you have more tools in your toolkit. So that's what's new in the world of design automation. we have a new API that should simplify your life and make it easier than ever for you to develop and deploy automation scripts to the cloud. And I guess we can pause now and see if there are any Forge specific questions that we want to answer. Otherwise, if there aren't, we can move on to AutoCAD Fabric, exciting new project in AutoCAD world.
So we don't have any questions yet, but by the time I finish saying we don't have any questions yet, I will give anybody a chance to type in any questions that they may have.
Sure, and if there aren't, we can do both at the end, so it's not a problem.
So there's nothing coming through, Scott. So I think probably it's best if you carry on.
Great. Okay, so now we're going into AutoCAD Fabric, and talk about this work that is being done in the worlds of web and mobile to bring AutoCAD everywhere. So the vision for Project Fabric was to deliver original AutoCAD everywhere. No matter where you are, in the office, in the field, or at home, or what device you're on, desktop, tablet, or laptop, you should have access to your AutoCAD. You should have access to your AutoCAD files, and you should have access to your AutoCAD with an experience that fits your needs in that specific situation. In the past, this is what the AutoCAD code base looked like across our platform. We had two separate code bases, one for our desktop products, Windows and Mac, and one for our mobile applications and web viewer. And you can see we had separate versions for iOS, Android, and UWP. This meant that when you moved a drawing from desktop to mobile, it needed to be translated because our mobile and our web core was fundamentally different than our AutoCAD engine on desktop. And this could take time, especially if you had a bad connection, and the drawings, there was not 100% fidelity when it got to your device, as happens when you have a translation of file format. So what Fabric does is it takes a subsegment of this 35 years of AutoCAD desktop code and uses it to power our mobile applications and our new and improved web application. This means that when you open a drawing on web or on mobile, it's a real AutoCAD DWG, and you can have a similar experience to the AutoCAD that you know and love on desktop. As you can see in this kind of simple architecture diagram, we're using a single core of code with a separate abstraction layer to connect Fabric to each platform. And you can also see that we're starting very simply. This is a process, and initially we're only supporting 2D graphics. Over time, Fabric will improve as we bring more and more AutoCAD capabilities over to AutoCAD Web and AutoCAD Mobile, but we're starting from a fairly simple base. If we look at the Fabric stack, we have a core Fabric engine, which is platform independent and supports a subset of the Object ARX APIs with which you're already familiar. This engine, this Fabric engine, runs on a background thread and communicates with the UI via an asynchronous API, which passes commands, object data, and inputs from the UI layer between Fabric and the UI. So each application built on Fabric, though, needs to build its own UI specific for that platform, whichever platform it happens to be running on. So that would be Swift on iOS, Java on Android, C# on UWP, and JavaScript on the web. But the idea here is that you simplify your work, because all that you need to do is customize your UI by platform. If you want to build a web application and a mobile application, that engine is not changing. So internally, we're now using Fabric to drive two of our clients, the free version of our iOS app and our new and improved web application, which is not quite ready for market yet, but we're working very hard on it. And that being said, I have a quick preview of our web app for you so you can see kind of the direction that we're going in. Here on the left, we have an iOS app, and here on the right is this mobile app. And this is an actual DWG running in a browser, which is pretty exciting. So let's go back, see if we can play this video for you. So here we have an actual DWG loaded in the browser. You have this panel on the left where you can see your layers. You can go between model space and paper space. Here you can turn layers on and off. If we want to turn off our boulders, you can see it updates the drawing. And the visual fidelity is highly improved from when we were having to do translations. So here we're selecting one of our boundaries and you can view the properties. We support measuring and snapping. So as we bring things from desktop over, you enable a feature and it should just work the way that it did on desktop, which is great. There's obviously tweaking that we need to do, and the team works very hard to not just recreate desktop AutoCAD, but try to do it in a smart and user-friendly way. But the idea here is, you can see as we zoom in, this is an actual DWG. You're not losing fidelity. You're not having to redraw as we change our viewport window. This is actual AutoCAD, which is pretty exciting to see this running in a browser. So another great part about this is you don't need to have AutoCAD installed on your computer to use this, right? You can access it from home since it's in a web browser. Any web-enabled device that you have, you just log into your Autodesk account and you can access this. So if you've forgotten that you need to, review something on here, you can go home and just open up your browser and do it from home as part of this AutoCAD Anywhere idea. So now I know you're thinking, this is awesome. I never thought I would see AutoCAD running in a browser, but why is this important and why is this on a DevDays presentation rather than just at AU? And since this is actual AutoCAD running in a browser, and it's built on the same object ARX APIs that you know from desktop, a subset of those as we're bringing capabilities across slowly. One day, AutoCAD Fabric may enable you to build plugins for an AutoCAD web application. And you'll be able to customize the Fabric engine to create your own commands using C++ because the engine is written in C++. And you could create your own UI. So on the web, you would create your UI using JavaScript and React. And then you would customize, you could add your engine plugins using C++. So you could create UI plugins, you could create command plugins, and you could also build your own branded web solution. So we're at the very early days of looking at third-party development on Fabric, but we know that there's a lot of opportunity out there as users start moving to the web. AutoCAD is moving to the web, and we would like to bring you along with us, and so that your add-ins can be made available to your customers, and they can benefit from your add-ins anywhere as well as their AutoCAD Anywhere. So if you're interested in expanding your desktop add-ins with a web component, please reach out. We would love to connect and talk about your add-ins, your use cases, and where we see this going in the future. So here is my contact information, and now we can probably take some questions on either Fabric, which is taking AutoCAD desktop and enabling AutoCAD everywhere, or we can talk about Forge Design Automation.
Thank you, Scott. There were a couple of questions came in. So I think one question I just wanted to try and clarify that, with Fabric, you're editing in the browser on a mobile device a native DWG file, and then you're saving that back to the native DWG file in the same format that the desktop application uses. So, this is absolutely modifying a native. When you draw a new, when you're editing the file. Actually, no, sorry, let me take that back. This is viewing at the moment. So, but the ultimate goal of Fabric, you can view this for yourself, is imagine a future where you are literally doing markup in a drawing. And you can save that markup to a drawing. It's then openable in AutoCAD. This is not about translating the file, is what I'm trying to say. I said that really badly.
No, that's it. But the idea is exactly right. The power of Fabric is that this is an actual DWG opened on a mobile device or in a browser. When you make edits, you're saving it to a DWG, and it should be you should maintain fidelity when you bring it back to desktop. So this enables you to interact with your files anywhere in a actual AutoCAD experience.
Yeah, and I was really trying to draw an analogy with the Forge viewer.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start again and see if I can say it in an intelligible way this time. So if you're using, some people might be saying, well, how does this different from a Forge viewer? So with the Forge viewer, you have a very lightweight JavaScript viewer which can view multiple file formats. And it does that by you have to upload the file to the Autodesk server, to the Forge server. You translate the file into basically a JSON format, and then the viewer pipes down a JSON format and displays it in your web page. So it's this long delay, or potentially a long delay for a large drawing of at least several minutes of that translation process. Whereas with Fabric, what you're talking about is you're piping the DWG directly. So when you have the DWG, the first time you run Fabric, there might be a slight delay because it has to download the Fabric code into your browser. But once you've done it once, it's cached. And after that, there is no translation process. So it's basically instant display of the DWG. Is that fair to say, Scott?
Yeah, it's very fair.
So that is a potential confusion that people have had is, well, what's the difference here between Fabric and actually previous versions of AutoCAD Web, as you mentioned, and also the Forge viewer. It's really this idea of having that native DWG that you open directly in the browser.
Yep, and the other major difference is that we are, looking to have this be an editor. So today, as Steve had mentioned, you can view and take some measurements, but we have an eye towards editing with the web editor in a way we don't necessarily with the viewer.
Yeah, and actually we're getting a few questions coming out, so I'm just going to, seeing as I apparently haven't drunk enough caffeine this morning, I'm going to read them out and you can answer, Scott. So does Fabric work with XREFs?
Yes, so today, Fabric, you can view XREFs if you have them loaded into a discoverable path. Fabric can find those and display them, and eventually we'll be looking to allow you to edit and do things like that with XREFs, but that's further away.
Will AutoCAD architecture in the future be available on Fabric?
So we're looking at supporting vertical objects. We do not have full fidelity of viewing vertical objects yet, but putting actual vertical editing capabilities in there is probably very far away. I think our priority will be viewing fidelity for these custom vertical commands and vertical objects initially.
Okay, and Thomas says, awesome. I guess that was a comment rather than a question.
Great.
But I just wanted to say it. Licensing, how will Fabric be licensed, asks James.
Yep, so for the Fabric clients themselves, will be licensed, as someone else determines that as part of the AutoCAD family. And Fabric third party, so how would it be licensed to you? It's very early days on that. So we haven't come out with any official structure yet, but we'd be interested in talking to you about it.
Yeah, and then Raoul asks, how about .NET plugins? How will they be integrated into AutoCAD Web?
So this core, since the core Fabric engine is coming from desktop code, that is C++, there is currently no .NET roadmap for Fabric. Although, again, this is something I'd be very interested in talking to you about. Customizing the engine is currently C++ and not .NET.
Okay. Oh, there are some more. Are drawing commands available?
So those would be creation. Again, those are, if I'm interpreting that correctly, you mean offset, line, polyline, all the great commands we have on desktop. That is totally where we're going. We can't show that today, but today we have a viewer you can interact with if you want to get a sense of what we're showing publicly, but we are definitely moving in an editing direction and creation direction.
I think it's fair to say at the moment what you're showing is viewing capability. We're at a fairly early stage of this. I think people can draw their own conclusions about where this could end up.
Right.
Okay. Actually, this is kind of related to the ACA one, but extending it a bit more. Will vertical DWG custom objects, in this case, for example, Civil 3D objects, be viewable, plottable, etc.?
So that is very much on our roadmap. It will depend on when this is made publicly available, but visual fidelity is something we're having a really high priority on. And if an object is missing, we will notify a user when they open it and say, hey, you know, these object enablers aren't present, just so you know. They won't be viewable when you're in Fabric, but when you bring it back to desktop, you won't have lost them. So there's a couple of different versions I could see custom object support going, but it would be one of those two.
Presumably Fabric would support proxy objects, wouldn't it? So it could display dumb placeholder graphics. Yeah,
and again, if you know, so that is definitely something that is important to us. Visual fidelity and data integrity are the two ways we look at it, and we'll go as far along the visual fidelity as we can, and when we can't, then we'll go to data integrity and make sure that when you open it up back on desktop, that we notify you it's not there, and when you open on desktop, it will be.
Okay. So related to the .NET question, what about Lisp?
So Lisp is not currently supported, but again, it's something we definitely hear a lot about. I don't know when, since Fabric is a process of bringing things over. The great thing is, since these are web and mobile apps, they move really quickly, right? We are iterating on Fabric very quickly. So although it's not in there currently, as I said, here's my email, reach out. I'd love to talk about what you'd like to see in Fabric in the future.
Okay, so there's a question here. I think it's a request to clarify where AutoCAD is actually running. Having a target of making a commercial web solution AutoCAD based, so the question is, will the engine be hosted on the Autodesk server, on a developer server, or mixed? But I think the answer there is the engine is actually hosted on the browser, isn't it?
Right. Yep. So for web, a Fabric web client, it would be on the browser, and then for the Fabric mobile clients, that's deployed on whichever device you've installed the app on.
But in your web page, if you reference the web component that enables AutoCAD in the browser, that would be hosted by us, but that would be downloaded and cached in the browser, wouldn't it?
Right. Yeah. But most of it is running server side, right? That's what makes this so cool. Is it's a
client side server. Yeah.
No, I mean, this is so you can different apps, download some things to the browser itself, and it can get heavy. And a Fabric is heavy, but the goal is that lots of this is. Oh no, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. Well, so there's a split between server and client, but most of it is being served up from the central server. We do download a little bit of things to help it run faster.
Okay, so must the DWG file be stored at the AutoCAD cloud?
No, it does not need to be. So it does need to be made available. So A360 is one way to get files made available to Fabric. But if you're on our mobile app today, you can open from Dropbox. You can open from any sort of cloud service. It does not need to be Autodesk cloud storage.
Can you also load a DWG from your desktop as well?
You can. So in our web, if you go to our web app today, you can drag and drop files from your desktop into the file manager for the web application.
Okay.
And then it's available wherever you go.
Yeah, and Raul is asking another question this time. What about sheet sets? Sheet set.
I love it.
Support?
Yeah, I love it. It's a great question. So this goes to our similar vein of answers that we've had, where sheet sets really valuable. We know that tons of people use them. They are just further along our roadmap than 2D basic editing, markup, and creation.
Yeah, I think you've struck a nerve here, with this Fabric stuff.
That's good. Look at all these questions. Yeah.
Yeah. A question on the speed of the UI. So, how fast is the UI in the web compared to desktop when dealing with big drawings?
So it's fast. I don't think I don't have frames per second on the tip of my fingers, but it is fast. It does degrade as you put bigger drawings in, as does desktop AutoCAD. But I would encourage you to, I would encourage you to check it out and load some drawings in and see what happens.
Yeah, and that's Fernando. Hi, Fernando. So this question now, I think, is a generic AutoCAD question rather than a Fabric question, because I know I think the same person asked a question in our keynote session, and I asked them to come back today to ask you, Scott. So it's about support for bidirectional languages like Arabic and Hebrew in base text with a TTF font. Is that something they should email about you privately?
They should. Yeah, I know I've heard this one before, but I can't attest to where that is in our backlog.
Yeah. Izar or Izar, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. If you just email, Scott's email is on the screen here, scott.crider@autodesk.com. Just send him a more detailed question by email, and he'll be able to chase that up for you. So then, I guess we didn't explain Civil 3D quickly. So Steve is asking about.
Yeah, I can run that real quick again. So again, our priorities here are, since this is a port project from desktop, we're bringing things over piece by piece, and we want to be pretty lean where we get stuff in front of you quickly. So our priorities are visual integrity, or data integrity, and visual fidelity. So today, Civil 3D custom objects are not supported. We will either prompt you with a notification that says some entities may be missing, or we'll do proxy objects, and in either case, data integrity will be maintained, where when you bring that file back to desktop, those objects will still be there. So, exactly what version will be made available to you guys, it depends on what month we're talking about, because as I said, Fabric moves very, very quickly. But it will be somewhere along that spectrum, from notification to proxy graphics to maintaining digital or data fidelity the entire time, data integrity.
Yeah. Okay, and then is there language support? I think the question there is probably localization. Is what languages are we going to localize this to?
Yeah, so that depends on the client itself, right? So our mobile app is localized, and I believe that would depend on the client itself, because Fabric can support it, but there's still work that a client needs to do to make that happen.
Yeah. Okay. And the next question, I think, again, is an AutoCAD product question. So why has the Shape Manager kernel for Revit got a good section box option and the AutoCAD API doesn't? So I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but I think the answer for that is that, Autodesk, our solid modeling kernel is common across all our products, but then each individual product decides what features they want to expose from that. So if there's a feature available, a Shape Manager feature available in Revit or Inventor, which is not available in AutoCAD, it's because that team has chosen, they decided that's important enough for them to expose as a feature, and then the API has followed from that, which implies that any feature that's not available, that's in Shape Manager from, say, Revit, which isn't in AutoCAD, is purely a case of product feature prioritization by that particular product team. Is that a fair answer, Scott?
That sounds good.
Yeah. LiDAR clouds, and I think this is a question about Fabric.
You guys I'm feeling good about getting AutoCAD drawings open in a browser. No, so point clouds, again, one of these things where it's core to AutoCAD workflows. This one, especially, we don't view web as a replacement for desktop, right? Web is going to be incorporated into cross-platform workflows. And we think there will probably be some work that always stays on desktop for processing. I don't know that point clouds is one of those, but it seems like a good candidate. We would likely look to see what do you want to do with these point clouds when you're away from your desktop. So maybe you do most of your heavy processing on desktop, but we want to enable you to still view it and snap to it and things like that. But we would look at that down the line.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's important to say, isn't it? This isn't a replacement for AutoCAD Desktop. It's a complement.
Right. It's a complement that has mobility benefits as well as this kind of install benefit of you don't need to have AutoCAD installed on your computer. If you are at the airport and you forget something, you can open up your laptop, open up a Chrome browser, and access your AutoCAD.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the questions are slowing down a bit now. Okay, so I think we're done now. We don't want to kind of treat people to long periods of silence waiting for more questions. So obviously this recording, we have been recording this. We will notify by email everybody who registered for this webinar when the recording is available. We'll tell you the download location. We'll make sure in that email as well, Vera, if you can make sure that the links in the PowerPoints, we can actually list those in the email. That would be great.
Sure. Sure.
Other than that, I think all that remains is for me to thank everybody in the audience for giving us your time today. To thank Scott for giving us his time. Really appreciate you coming and talking about these things, Scott. It's really, really helpful. And if anyone is interested, has any more questions on anything we discussed today, you can email Scott, scott.kreider@autodesk.com, or me, stephen.preston@autodesk.com, and we will do our best to answer the questions. And if you're particularly interested in being an early adopter for fiber, that's definitely something to contact Scott about. So anything finally from you, Viru? Any final announcements?